Let's go ahead and get started. We've still got some folks jumping on, but a lot of the information I'm going to share here at the beginning is more table setting and just a few reminders. So again, welcome to today's Cutting Green Tape Exchange. So glad that you're here joining us. Appreciate you carving out the time. I also know it's the lunch hour, so certainly feel free to nourish yourself as you're nourishing your understanding of the time we're spending together learning about cutting green tape. Just a couple of reminders and a quick introduction. If I haven't met you yet, my name's Shawn Johnson. I'm way over at the University of Montana, so had a chance to already see what the next hour looks like. And I'll tell you, the noon hour was really good to me. I hope it's really good to you. And the reason I've been helping support these exchanges is that I'm part of the California Landscape Stewardship Network, and really glad to be part of a group of people who are really thinking deeply about how do we come together to learn, to advance, to work together on stewardship and conservation practices and outcomes across the state. And if you're familiar with the network, that's fantastic. If you haven't learned anything about the network up until now, I think there'll be a link in the chat here soon. And in fact, the Cutting Green Tape initiative itself is a good example of how the network works with statewide leaders and with all of you to catalyze, convene, and move forward important conversations across the state. And really glad to have been part of Cutting Green Tape from the early days and continuing to see its growth and evolution. So thank you so much. A few reminders here just on the board. We are going to invite you to use the chat box throughout this. It's a great place to connect with each other, with friends and colleagues, to ask questions, to bring forward additional information, resources, links that you might want to share with this audience. Old hat by now, but because we're in this Zoom space, please remember to keep yourself muted whenever you're not speaking and your video off. If you are speaking, welcome you to turn both on so we can both see and hear you. And then at the end of today's exchange, we'll be using Poll Everywhere. And so just as you look into that chat box throughout today for information, links, and resources, please don't forget to click at that Poll Everywhere link at the very end to share your feedback with us. Want to start by just giving us a little bit of a roadmap for today. And as we're doing that, it looks like our numbers have kind of stabilized too. And so I'd actually invite you to jump over into the chat and welcome your thoughts on an opening prompt for us. So I think we've used the chat previously to say, hey, tell us a little bit about yourself. Today, we'd like you to share where you're joining us from. And certainly my mind has been with a lot of you throughout the state as I'm reading the headlines and the news about the weather events, whether that's snow, ice, flooding, damage, whatever it might be there. Really been thinking about you. So we were curious to know where you're joining us from. And then I'm also really curious to know why you're joining us today. We've been doing these for a couple of years now and really thinking about, of all the things that you could be doing today, why was it that the Cutting Green Tape Exchange rose to the top? What were you hoping to learn? Who were you hoping to learn from or with? What information were you seeking? What kind of connection really brought you here today? Would love to hear more about that. We're going to revisit similar questions at the end of today's exchange, but wanted to just start there. So jump on in. And I see we've got a couple of people already providing some feedback to us. So Secretary Crowfoot jumped in, very important to the work that he's doing. He's joining today from Sacramento. John Cabot joining. Welcome, John, from Hotlam, the slopes of Mount Shasta. So yeah, starting to see some people, Shannon, Steve, really appreciate you just jumping over there and sharing a little bit about who you are, where you're joining us from, and why you're here today. And just a lot of gratitude for the time and commitment that you've spent working together with us over the years to advance this important conversation. I want to flip into a little bit of an overview and an agenda for today. So if you've got a slide to share on that, Devin, we can use that as a visual to walk through this. But as usual, we've got a really great mix of high-level conversations that we would like to have, some structured opportunities to do some deep dives, and then an opportunity to exchange information and content with each other. We're going to start with some opening reflections and updates from Secretary Crowfoot. Glad to have him spending a lot of time with us today. He's been a leader of this conversation from the beginning, and always great to hear what's on his mind, what he's seeing, what he's learning alongside all of us. And then we're going to move forward from that, or launch forward from that, by thinking about how can we collectively continue to mark progress on the work we're doing to get together. And one of the things that we're going to unveil is this Cutting Green Tape progress dashboard. So we're going to have Devin come forward and share that with us. And then we've been doing this now for a while, but these Hidden Hero Awards have become such a cool part of these exchanges. We've got a lot of friends and colleagues who are often hidden in plain sight, but are doing amazing work across the state to advance work around regulatory effectiveness, but also so many other aspects of the work. So get to see who today's hidden heroes are. From there, we're going to revisit some conversations that we've been having with Tahoe Regional Planning Agency and get to do a deep dive on one of the case studies, or on a case study that's reflecting some of their work, and really diving into, well, what are the lessons from that we can amplify and share out with all of you. We've always really enjoyed the updates that we get from CDFW and the State Water Board, so glad to have them join us again today. Another look at how this work is impacting and influencing the way that they're not just doing their own work, but working together with you all. And then we do want to close today by really thinking about what is the road ahead for these exchanges? What are those key pieces of value that you've derived from these conversations? What else might we think about including in order to continue to facilitate learning, connection, and momentum as we continue to think about what's possible and how to get to that future that we're all hoping to achieve. From there, we'll send you on with the rest of your day, but really do appreciate the 90 minutes you're carving out to be with us this morning or this afternoon. So just jumping right in, I don't often read Secretary Crowfoot's formal introduction, but I am today because I think it's a good reminder.
Don't do it.
I'm going to do it because it's a good reminder of everything that you're doing in the scope of this. So here you go, Wade. I'm going to do it. You're appointed. Well, it's going to be truncated a little bit. You were appointed in 2019 by Governor Newsom. You oversee 21,000 employees, incredible scope, and that's not counting all the partners and other folks that you work with across the state. It includes not just that administration and management, but the stewardship of state forests, natural lands, rivers, waterways, coasts, and ocean, protecting fish and wildlife, and overseeing energy development. You're a member of the cabinet. You're advisor to Governor Newsom on natural resources and environmental issues. You've been a catalytic person behind the scenes for a number of efforts, and in front of the scenes, I would say, for Cutting Green Tape, for the agency's work in biodiversity, inclusive access, and so much more. And obviously, you're also a connoisseur of really good content online because you're on these exchanges often, and this is some of the best content out there. So thanks so much for spending some time again with us today, sharing your thoughts, reflections, and hopes for how you're seeing Cutting Green Tape grow and continue to evolve and serve your interests, but also those across the state. So turn it over to you. Good to see you.
Thanks, Shawn, and thanks everybody for being here. First of all, hope that you are dry and safe. This is an extraordinary winter. I explained to people that October ended our driest 3-year period in over a century. And then in January, we experienced our wettest 3 weeks on record. And then this March has been just super intense on the storms and the rain and snow. So it's been challenging in a lot of respects, and we've been focused a lot on emergency response for storms and flooding. But I think with this group, I'll take a moment to look at the glass half full, which is the restoration of major water flow in our rivers. Our wetlands are flooding up. The Sierra Nevada, that has been so parched and subject to tree mortality, has record snow, which is going to be incredible to the landscapes up there. We're intensely focused on working to find environmentally responsible ways to recharge our groundwater basins and utilize this historic snowpack that we have in coming weeks to actually bring our basins up and help implement our Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. So, you know, we were getting ready for another fourth, year of worsening drought, and this has really taken a turn. So while we have real challenges that we're facing as a result of how much rain and snow has fallen, let's also recognize this is just incredibly renewing and restorative for the environment. So I'm really excited about that. We are gaining momentum across the state. I consider myself a supporter of cutting the green tape. We really have the dream team of leaders driving this effort on this convening. Just a bit on the origin story for those that haven't heard me talk about it before. When I took this job, I was immediately educated by a bunch of different folks, including Sustainable Conservation, which is a nonprofit group, as well as the Landscape Stewardship Network. And they explained to me it is far too difficult and costly to do good environmental things in the state, whether it's protecting a stream or restoring a wetland. And the fact that always sticks in my mind is, in some cases, upwards of a third of a project's budget to do something, purely environmentally beneficial was spent in project planning and permitting. And we, can collectively reflect that this just doesn't have to be like this. And so that really seeded this cutting green tape movement. And I call it a movement because it's not some command and control. We have multiple agencies within state government. We have federal partners, local partners, and really driven by practitioners, folks that are actually out there getting these projects done. So it's almost 3 years ago that we started this, and we started to identify what we could change to actually improve how quickly projects could be delivered and how cost effectively they could be delivered. And we have made a ton of progress. I want to just list some different points of progress because I think it's important to understand, just how far we've come in the last few years. We've got a set of programmatic permits for restoration. I want to give credit to Sustainable Conservation, the state's water board, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and so many others. The goal of these programmatic permits is to help specific projects happen more quickly by getting most of that environmental clearance done on a programmatic basis. And so those programmatic permits, which in themselves are pretty complicated, are now taking flight. And I'm really eager to see how they improve project delivery across different agencies. So that's been a really big deal. New and improved processes, simplified paperwork, fewer proposal and evaluation steps, clear, accessible guidance have reduced the bureaucratic barriers that I think had some of you tearing your hair out for years. I imagine some barriers remain, but a lot of work done on process improvement. We collectively made the case to the legislature for a CEQA exemption, creating a statutory exemption for restoration projects. And we know this now as SERP, which is the statutory exemption for restoration projects. Fish and Wildlife, under Chuck Bonham's direction, has taken the lead on this really effectively. We've got projects that have now had their CEQA waived by the Fish and Wildlife Director where appropriate. That's saved valuable time and upwards of $1 million in project costs, which is great. Following Fish and Wildlife's pilot cutting green tape initiative, the legislature, the governor, gave Fish and Wildlife permanent funding to create a statewide program. And we have leaders of the statewide program on the phone. That's been transformative. As I understand it, assisted with environmental review exemptions for more than 146 projects, restoring 134,000 plus acres, 103 miles of stream, estimated to save about $1.5 million in project costs, and project processing times, which once spanned 1 or 2 years, now take an average of 70 days. So just want to give a shout out to team DFW on that. Really, really exciting. So those are some examples of the work and how it's manifesting. I actually had a chance to show the governor the day before yesterday a huge wetland restoration at the southern end of the Salton Sea called the Species Conservation Habitat Project that benefited from some of our cutting green tape. And it was incredible. I mean, you looked in either direction as far as the eye could see, and this was land that will soon be watered up to provide environmental habitat and critically important in that region, suppressed some of this exposed playa. So it's really fun. It's really energizing to actually get out and see the fruits of our collective labor. And I do feel a real palpable sense of momentum. At the same time, we can't rest on our laurels. We have to continue to move further and faster. So let's make sure that these changes that we've introduced are actually working. Let's figure out where we need to adapt. And then let's figure out what is the new frontier of reforms. What other process changes can we make? What other things can we do to make these projects get delivered a lot more quickly? You know, we have sobering news on the environment. You saw probably the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which are the world scientists, let us know just the compounding impacts of climate change. Closer to home, we have the closure of one of our key salmon fisheries for this season as a result of declining numbers there. So I think we can take a lot of energy and encouragement from our progress, but let's continue to drive, again, further and faster. You know, we're in the second half of the Newsom administration, T-minus 4 years, and I really want to hardwire improvements that we care about into the processes and into the various entities, including the ones in our agency. And so let's continue to challenge ourselves, recognize progress, but recognizing there's a lot more work ahead. So with that, Shawn, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks so much, Secretary Crowfoot. Really inspiring to hear all of that progress that's been made over the last several years, including some of these recent conversations that you're having and sites that you're visiting. Fun and energizing were two words that really stood out to me when you were thinking about it and how that's creating not just momentum within those projects, but on the ground and across the state. And yet there's so much more to do. So how do we continue to grow together as a community to adapt, to explore those next frontiers? Thank you so much. We know we're going to have you back here in a minute to help us with the Hidden Hero Awards. But in the meantime, I want to invite forward someone who doesn't always make an appearance in front of the screen, and that's Devin Landry, the coordinator for the California Landscape Stewardship Network, who's been doing a ton of coordination and whose name you've probably seen in email or newsletters that you receive. Devin, just want to invite you forward to build off of this conversation and share not just some of these specific examples of progress, but how we're trying to capture and share that back with a new progress dashboard tool. So Devin?
Yeah, thanks, Shawn. And thank you, Secretary Crowfoot, for your opening words. We're excited over here at the California Landscape Stewardship Network in the spirit of some of these updates that the Secretary was just offering. We're thinking a lot about how we individually and collectively can pursue cutting green tape goals. And in service of that, the California Landscape Stewardship Network is offering a tool for tracking the efforts to implement the original recommendations that appeared in our 2020 report. I'll drop a link here that are cutting green tape, regulatory efficiencies for a resilient environment. And for those that have read that report, you'll recall that it's the product of a series of roundtables and conversations that were garnered input from over 150 stakeholders who helped identify and craft these recommendations over the course of 2019 and 2020 that in part helped to launch the Cutting Green Tape Interagency Initiative. Many thanks go to the paper's lead information gatherers and synthesizers and authors. That's Kellex Nelson, the executive director at the San Mateo Resource Conservation District. You'll hear more from Kellex today. Her colleague, Jim Robbins, who's the principal and senior ecologist at Alness Ecological, as well as Sharon Farrell of the Stewardship Network and formerly of Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy. So as an evolution of us tracking these recommendations that you see in the 2020 report, we're introducing what we like to call the Cutting Green Tape Progress Dashboard. It's a tracking tool that's intended to offer practitioners a high-level summary of the current status of each of these recommendations that you see in the report. I'm going to share my screen to show you what the tool actually looks like here, where you'll be able to find it on the California Landscape Stewardship Network's website. I'll drop those links right after sharing the tool with you. And so as you can see, the recommendations themselves we have a legend here that some of these recommendations have already been implemented. So if we open the first category that matches how you see it in the report, efficiencies for small scale projects, our legend suggests to you where some of these recommendations have been implemented as done, where others have been achieved through different mechanisms, through different solutions that still meet the recommendation's ultimate goal, just through different pathways. And then still others that are not started or not yet addressed. And what you will also see in scrolling through this tool is that it is laid out in the same fashion as the report is. And so you're able to crosswalk this tool with the 2020 report in the same fashion and gain that information about where things have progressed between 2020 and 2023. So we see this tool as another way to capture the momentum behind the Cutting Green Tape initiative and really invite you to take some time to review it and share it with your networks and to offer your feedback on how this tool can help you advance our shared goals in this space. So thank you all for joining today. It's always good to be here at the Cutting Green Tape Exchange. And with that, I'll let Shawn take it back over.
Great. Thank you, Devin. Really cool to see this new tool come online. I think a lot of us are part of efforts where a lot of the focus is on shared thinking and brainstorming and planning, and it's not often we get to implement ideas together and think about what's the pathway we're on, how are we making progress, how are we tracking that progress, and continuing to look for creative ways to meet our shared needs. So really appreciate the chance to do that. Do want to continue moving forward with our program and invite one of the authors of the report and a just long-standing and important leader in this space, Kellex Nelson. There she is on the screen with me. Hi, Kellex. Good to see you. Want to invite Wade back to the screen as well. And we're at that fun part of the exchange where we get to honor and recognize two more hidden heroes. So Kellex, I think I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce this one.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Shawn. This is one of my favorite things to do is to be able to recognize those individuals who have been on the ground doing this work and some of the people who are issuing these permits and having to be the front line in this work, who are really advancing innovations. So the Cutting Green Tape Hidden Hero Award recognizes the innovation and dedication of public employees who are increasing the pace and scale of environmental stewardship in California. These hidden heroes are working with creativity and commitment to improve governmental processes so that we can implement California's natural resources goals and plans more efficiently and cost effectively, maintaining fidelity to California's environmental protection standards. So I'm really delighted to present these awards today to two of our federal partners. That is Chandra Jenkins with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and Joe Pecharich with the NOAA Restoration Center. Neither of them could join us today, unfortunately, so we are awarding them in absentia. And it is also our first time recognizing our federal partners in this essential work, because as many of us know, to get permits to do restoration, it often requires local, state, and federal permits. And the state leadership that we have on the screen with me right now has been an essential part of the equation, but these federal partners are really important as well. And Wade, I'm sure that's something that you might want to speak to about the importance of these federal partners.
Sure, and I liked Barb's quip in the chat. They're very hidden heroes today because they're not able to join us. But I know that they like you explained to me that they both really appreciated being recognized. You know, at the end of the day, the work that happens in permitting agencies is critically important. We all know that, and really complicated. And sometimes the easiest place to be is either on the outside criticizing, what's wrong, or in a position like mine where I actually don't do any of the work but suggest that things need to change. It's really the people within these agencies that we want to lift up as critical partners because they don't get the credit that they deserve for being innovative within the structures and the strictures of their agencies or reinterpreting the way that things have got done. You know, organizational inertia is really powerful, particularly in big governmental agencies. And so all of this work through cutting the green tape is only possible when we have smart partners that are right in these legacy processes that can help us modify and improve them. So in the case of Chandra and Joe, you know, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, NIMS and NOAA, I mean, those, you know, huge, complicated entities that have, you know, really complex statutory requirements. And so within all that, Chandra and Joe have figured out ways that they can actually help deliver projects more quickly and frankly, you know, institutionalize those changes moving forward. So I'm really excited to lift them up and have them join this growing community of hidden heroes. And I know, you know, Kellex, when we're all together again in person, which is hopefully at some point this year, we can bring them and essentially all the hidden heroes and maybe get, you know, be in discussion with them around, you know, the work that they do and where they see there are opportunities for more of their colleagues to lead on these topics as well. So just very excited for Chandra and Joe to get this acknowledgement and know that there are many more hidden heroes that will be lifting up in coming months and years.
Yeah, and I think it's also, it speaks to the fact that all of you who are out there who are slogging through at every level of government to help advance these projects, how much we see you and appreciate you, especially those of us who are on the ground trying to get restoration projects done. Those of you who help as partners to maintain this fidelity to California's environmental protections and still advance projects quickly and effectively, how much that's appreciated. I remember, Wade, soon after you hired your then new Deputy Secretary, Jennifer Norris, when we were talking with her about the Cutting Green Tape initiative, she was talking about with her experience as in federal government with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and then coming to the state through the Natural Resources Agency and her deep understanding of what it means to be someone implementing these laws, that she felt like the work ahead of her was to unleash the creativity and the innovation for the people who are doing this work, sort of give them the ability to be their creative selves and advance the projects and the work that is what got them into those careers to begin with. And so I think that this initiative, recognizing these folks, all supports that, enabling them to be creative. One specific example that I can give those of you out there about how these federal and state efficiencies or this work is coming together, that is highlighting one of our awardees, Joe Pecharich, is that when we are using a programmatic biological opinion for fisheries restoration for salmonids, that comes under his shop, and then he works with the California Coastal Commission on a consistency determination under the Coastal Act with that efficiency of the federal government. So then we're able to get a coastal development permit and a biological opinion to advance fisheries restoration for critically endangered Central Coast coho salmon. That's just one example of how these efficiencies sort of leverage each other and can advance important solutions. So many thanks to our heroes.
Yeah, and I'll just say on the Army Corps side, I think we're really excited, you know, across the Corps to work with them on leaning forward on, you know, all of what we call nature-based solutions, and the Army Corps calls designing with nature. So we're seeing a lot of, you know, vision and leadership at the Army Corps, which has obviously been a big traditional organization that sometimes gets identified as, you know, complicated to get projects done through. So we're really excited with the partnerships with all of our federal agencies, and particularly the two whose leaders are being, you know, celebrated here today.
Thank you.
And Ashley and others think it's a good idea to bring these folks together in discussion. So hopefully when we're together again, I love the idea of a panel of our heroes.
Sounds like a plan. And I think you should get an award, Wade, for being able to monitor the chat and ban screen at the same time. I'm entirely incapable of doing that. But I do know that we need to transition now into.
Oh, can I suggest one more thing, Kellex?
Yeah.
For the practitioners online here today, can Shawn or somebody give them an email of the person if they have any recommendations for hidden heroes? I know the Landscape Stewardship Network, you have your ways of identifying people, but it would be great to, get nominations too.
Yeah, that's good. I will put my name out there, and you can email me. So I'll put it in the chat. Great. Thank you for that recommendation. And I see that Shawn has come on the screen as well.
Yeah, I really appreciate that we're continuing to honor and recognize these folks. And for all the reasons, Kellex, way that you just shared, these were great nominations and people to highlight for this go around. I love the idea of bringing people together too. So just in the spirit of moving forward with our program for today, excited to do a deep dive with a partner who's been a part of these conversations for a while now, the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. And I think I'm going to actually turn it back to you, Kellex, here shortly to introduce Kat McIntyre and the case study in front of us today, but really excited to both have this chance to think broadly about the work of cutting green tape and then think specifically about what's happening in particular places and what are we learning as we move from conception to planning to implementation. So Kellex, back to you.
Great, thanks. Yeah, this is a very fun case study, and I'm looking forward to having a conversation about this. So Dr. Kate McIntyre is joining us. She has her PhD in forest policy and collaborative governance from Colorado State University, where she focused her dissertation on policy tools that support collaboration, which is a lot of what we talk about here. She is the Forest Health Program Manager for the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. If when she's talking, and I'm talking with her, we refer to TRPA, that's what we're talking about. And she's also near and dear to me. She's on the board of the Tahoe RCD, Resource Conservation District, and is a commission member on the National Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission, and a committee member on the National Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Committee. So I'm super excited to have you here, Kat. We have talked in the past in this forum a little bit about the work that's been done on this project, but maybe we can just step back for a moment, and I'll ask you to very briefly describe the project that we're talking about today.
Great. Thank you so much, Kellex, and thank you all for having me. So I'm going to set a little bit of context on this project. In 1997, there was really a call to action in the Tahoe Basin. We were losing lake clarity at about a foot a year, and our standard command and control regulatory approaches were really just not enough to halt and improve the environmental conditions that we hold so near and dear. And so from this, the Environmental Improvement Program, or the EIP, was formed, which is a collaborative effort of 80 plus partners around the basin to advance multi-jurisdictional and multi-benefit restoration projects. One such project is the Taylor-Tallac Restoration Project. So to give you a little bit of a visual behind me, this photo, that is the Taylor-Tallac Restoration. It is a creek marsh ecosystem on the south shore of Lake Tahoe. And this is a multi-phase restoration project that focuses on the marsh and creek ecosystems, and it involves the U.S. Forest Service Lake Tahoe Basin Management Unit, the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, Lahontan Water Quality Control Board, Army Corps of Engineers, and California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And there's multiple benefits and multiple restoration goals that are associated with this project. There are pieces regarding restoration and access, habitat improvement, watershed and stream restoration, regarding reconnecting historical channels and swales, and then an aquatic invasive species, or an AIS removal piece, specifically around Eurasian milfoil infestations. And so that first phase of the project is the AIS removal. And this is a critical piece to accomplish before moving into the next steps. We cannot connect the swales or move around channels or put them back in their historical spaces if we do not remove the aquatic invasive species that are currently present. And so this first phase includes 17 acres of aquatic invasive species removal through the benthic bottom barriers. And for those who don't know, benthic bottom barriers are essentially large tarps that get put into these systems, and they smother the plants. They're installed with rebar, and they will remain in place for approximately 3 years. This project is really the first of its kind for the Tahoe Basin. It's the largest ever implementation of benthic bottom barriers in the basin, and it's also the first time installing these in marsh ecosystems. And so permitting started on this project in late 2020. My colleague, Shannon Freeman, who is on this call, she really led up the permitting process with receipt of final permits that ended in about at the end of 2021. And this project had several hiccups along the way, including permitting delays, weather and water level issues. We had historical drought last year that led to endangered species habitat growth in that area, the Tahoe yellowcrest, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and scheduling delays due to high visitation and recreation. Specifically, implementation for this project needs to occur in the spring, summer, and fall months, and that is Memorial Day, Labor Day, and 4th of July, which this is a hotspot for visitors to come and hang out at Lake Tahoe. So because of this, once permits were in hand and implementation had begun, we thought it was important to conduct an after action review and look at a mini cutting the green tape case study of this project on the permitting and planning process to understand the lessons learned or efficiencies that we can gain going forward. And so we brought in a contractor and facilitator that conducted interviews with the implementers and partners, so the Forest Service, Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, Army Corps of Engineers, CDFW, as well as the Hunt and Water Quality Control Board. And then that was followed up with a collaborative workshop with all of our partners to identify lessons learned and recommendations. One of those recommendations was the creation of a basin-wide cutting the green tape group. This is being led up again by Shannon Freeman, who is on this call, to look at the larger regulatory environment in the basin and where we can find efficiencies and streamlining to get these critical multi-jurisdictional restoration projects kicked off and in the ground. This group has just started and it's in its early stages, but we are hopeful that they're going to be able to dig in and really find some of those efficiencies so we can just continue to do these types of projects and multiply our success. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Cal-X, if you have additional questions.
Yeah, thank you for that summary. So as I understand it, there was, a while ago, there was this really big call to action, shared purpose, right? The lake is losing clarity, and that matters to everybody, whether you're a business owner there, whether you're a resident, whether you're an environmental advocate. And then there's this large coalition that forms out of that and some special environmental protections. And then we get to a point where there's a particular project. And as I understand it, you were surprised. You thought that project would be a slam dunk.
Correct.
And found out that it wasn't a slam dunk. It turns out it had a lot of regulatory complexity. And then you're having some of these realizations around the same time, if I understand correctly, that the Cutting Green Tape Initiative was getting going in the state. So you've described to me before that the state's Cutting Green Tape Initiative gave you sort of the platform or the foundation to do that work. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And I'm wondering also, what about that might be transferable to other parts of the state?
Yeah, so we really used the state's Cutting the Green Tape Initiative as the foundation to do this work. It was those building blocks and the model and framework that we could then apply to the Tahoe Basin, but take it a little bit further, recognizing that the Tahoe Basin has some regulatory complexity and uniqueness associated with it, including 2 states, federal agencies, multiple counties, and so that we needed to take it a little bit further. And so I think that's one of the lessons learned, is that the Cutting the Green Tape statewide initiative really acts as a great foundation and framework to then build off of and tailor into whatever system or landscape or region that you're working in, and bring in those other elements.
Yeah. So one of the things that you've, I think, really been tackling with your Cutting Green Tape Initiative, or Cutting the Green Tape, where some people use the and some don't, for different efforts, has been this idea of multi-benefit projects, right? And with a lot of the conversations that happened with developing the initial 14 recommendations for the state's Cutting Green Tape effort, has been concern about anything that isn't pure restoration, right? or anything that might have co-benefits. And I see that in state funding programs, in permitting conversations, and trying to get any work done at scale, people are talking about multi-benefit projects. And frankly, I think it was Chris Trinnell from the Department of Water Resources once said, any project that you do, if it's at a big enough scale, it's going to be a multi-benefit project. And so how, are there any lessons learned about how you've tackled multi-benefit projects, or whether people have concerns about whether it passes the red face test, if it's restoration, if it has other aspects or components to it?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the environmental improvement program and the projects that fall under that program have always, since its inception, have multiple benefits. And those are benefits that include directly related benefits to restoration and those that are more tangentially related to restoration. So we tackle our projects really keeping in mind always that there's a clear connection between the natural and built environment. So for example, the Tahoe Basin has seen peak visitation, and we're starting to really dig into some of those more challenging questions around transportation or destination stewardship and sustainable recreation. And the impacts of those projects directly relate to the benefits we can generate from our restoration projects. So for example, the Taylor-Tallac project, as I mentioned, obviously has clear ecological restoration benefits, but also those recreation and visitation goals and elements associated with it, whether that's improving a trail system or moving a bridge so that the access to the beach is easier for visitors. Those all end up directly relating to the overall success of the ecological restoration. And so here in the Tahoe Basin, we really feel that it's important to take that larger holistic look and approach and not forget that really the main thrust or crux of these projects is the restoration component, and that part of that might include some of these built environment pieces, whether that's a sewer line replacement or moving a sewer line completely, or working with our utilities to do resilience corridors. So we are always looking at all of the benefits that we can get, and not discouraging projects if they do have those other benefits, that's okay. Those are important and critical to our overall vision for the basin as well.
It sounds almost as though the focus is on the place rather than the one particular resource issue or one particular permit. It's really coming together around a place that people share.
Exactly. Correct.
And that place has considerations that come together when doing restoration that
absolutely
include non-restorative elements.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. And some of the multi-benefit projects, some of them are co-benefits that come from restoration, and others are things that you need to deal with if you're going to do restoration, or others are things that are just part of managing the same space.
Correct. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Got it. And so what were some of the outcomes of your cutting the green tape effort so far, both the low-hanging fruit and some things that maybe are more deferred or more aspirational that you're working towards? What are some specific outcomes that people might recognize?
Absolutely. We were really, we had a great opportunity, and by hiring a facilitator and a contractor to come in and help guide this process, that we have a whole list of recommendations that really fall into short-term, more medium, and then long-term recommendations in terms of implementation and where we think we can get movement. In terms of some of that low-hanging fruit, one of the first recommendations was just setting up the Tahoe Basin Cutting the Green Tape Working Group that's looking more regionally at our basin. And as I mentioned, that's being coordinated by Shannon Freeman, who is on this call. They just had their first meeting. They are engaging with agencies that operate in the basin to understand what are the challenges, where are the opportunities, what might be some projects that are coming up that would be a good case, not a case study, but a good model to test out some of these new innovative approaches. So that was one of the low-hanging fruit recommendations. Another one was to develop a restoration action agenda. And so to sit down collaboratively with our partners and schedule out our planning and permitting needs so that ultimately we can increase the pace and scale of projects, really daylight what's on the dockets for each agency and what the lift might be in terms of permitting. And then one of the longer term ones was really building more capacity for collaboration across all of the agencies that are operating within the basin. So for example, one of the recommendations from that piece might be having an environmental improvement program permit specialist at each agency that is just handling projects that fall within this purview of the environmental improvement program to help. We know that they're going to have multiple benefits. We know that these are high profile, important projects to get in the ground. They would just be handling that caseload, and it would hopefully streamline the process, getting them through the permitting and eventually into implementation. So those are some of the recommendations that came out.
And these recommendations and these outcomes are in the case study, right?
Absolutely.
So,
yep.
So for folks who are looking at the chat, Devin had dropped that case study in here. So if you want to see some of those specific recommendations or outcomes and see what may or may not be adaptable to your regions, you can check that out. And then my last question for you, Kat, is, I think that we're all familiar with the fact that cutting green tape has the potential to increase the to advance the pace and scale of work, to remove some of these barriers, make it more cost effective, make it faster to get your permits, less waste in the money that's spent sometimes, et cetera. But maybe sometimes what we talk about less is how it can improve the quality of the products for better outcomes on the ground, for better restoration, not just more restoration. Can you speak a little bit to how you may or may not be seeing that coming up, coming out of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So this process for the Tahoe Basin has really daylit what we already know around collaboration, and that is that building trust and collaborating are integral to getting work done more efficiently and having more successful projects. So if anything, this process and our Cutting the Green Tape regional working group is just going to strengthen and boost our collaboration and relationship building, which ultimately allows us to tackle those larger, more complex, harder projects and think more creatively and maybe test out some ideas or implementation modes that are more innovative. And so I would say that is one of the biggest pieces. It's not just, as you mentioned, increasing the pace and scale of these projects, but really building that foundation within the basin to allow us to adaptively manage, to try new things, to test out which method might be working the best, and then to replicate that over and over again, and building that trust between our partners so they feel confident that we all have the same goal in mind. And that's really getting great restoration done at the end of the day.
It sounds a bit like some of the work that we've done in the Central Coast with the Integrated Watershed Restoration Program, where one of the outcomes that I see with that collaborative effort is a shift from choosing projects based on their feasibility of getting them permitted within your funding window. So it's a shift from doing projects because they're feasible and more towards doing the projects that are the highest priority, doing the work that's most needed. And sometimes that means tackling things that are more difficult, so they have been deferred for a while. It sounds like that's a little bit of what you're seeing as an outcome of this effort as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. As we build steam, we're just going to be able to pull up those harder, more intractable projects that have maybe we've shied away from. And we're going to have more confidence that we can do it collaboratively and bring our public along and get the great work done that we need to get done.
That's great. I think this is a very interesting case study. I hope for those of you who are with us today, you're seeing things about this that are relevant to your regions, regardless of whether you have a distinct shared basin that's so geographically defined. I think there's a lot here that we can take away. And I guess before we wrap up, I should ask you, Kat, is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't think to, or anything that you feel it could be good of the order?
No, I think this was great. Thank you for having us and me specifically with the TRBA, and just allowing us to highlight this project as a good example of how we're trying to take the lessons learned at the state level and put them into play at the regional level.
Thank you. I hope you'll stick around because there may be some questions that come up for you in the chat, or
Absolutely.
people might even want your contact information if they want to follow up. So I would encourage folks to make use of the chat for that. And thank you, Kat, so much. And then, oh yeah, it's already happening. And then I'm going to ask if Brad Henderson and Jessica Nadolski would join us on screen. And if they could be spotlighted, we're going to shift our conversation now to updates from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the State Water Resources Control Board. And we've got, get my papers in order here. And if you both would, oh, you're already here. So we're gonna shift to an interagency conversation here. So Jessica is with the Wetlands Permitting and Enforcement Unit with the Division of Water Quality at the State Water Resources Control Board, and was a leader in developing the most recent new general order that we're going to be talking about for permitting restoration projects. And Brad Henderson heads up the Cutting the Green Tape program for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Many of you have been to these before, have seen him in these exchanges, or if any of you have gone through the process for getting a statutory exemption for your restoration project under that new provision, you've met with Brad and his team, as my team has. So we're grateful to you for that. And maybe Jessica, I can ask you first if you would be so kind. There's a lot of buzz, a lot of excitement about the new general order, the statewide general restoration order. Can you tell us what its purpose is, how it accomplishes the goals of cutting green tape?
Sure. Yeah. First, I really want to thank you for inviting me to the exchange today. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak about the new restoration order. We're fairly excited about it at Waterboard. So thank you. So what is SRGO? So it's the the statewide restoration general order, commonly referred to as SRGO or simply just the order. It was adopted in August of last year and provides statewide Clean Water Act and Section 401 water quality certification and waste discharge requirements for eligible projects. And those project types include everything from improvements to stream crossing, fish passage, floodplain restoration, tidal, subtidal, and freshwater restoration. So just for a moment of background, the State Water Board had previously adopted a small habitat restoration general order that provides water quality certification for smaller projects. Those are projects that do not exceed 5 acres or a cumulative total of 500 linear feet of stream bank or coastline, and that qualify for a CEQA Class 33 categorical exemption. So the SRGO is a companion to that older order for small habitat restoration projects. So if you have a larger project that doesn't fit that older order, so if your project exceeds the 5 acres, does not qualify for a CEQA exemption, as well as includes state-only jurisdictional waters, then the SRGO can now provide a permit pathway for Water Board's authorization. To enroll under the SRGO, eligible projects must meet the definition of a restoration project as stated in the order, which is a project that results in a net increase in aquatic or riparian resource area functions and or services through implementation of the eligible project types, relevant general protection measures, and consideration of design guidelines. Enrollment is at the discretion of the approving water board, so either a regional board or the state water board, depending on your project location. So I think the second half of your question was, how does SRGO accomplish CGT goals? So as you all know, the basis of cutting the green tape is improving regulatory processes and policies so that restoration work can more quickly and simply occur and more cost effectively too. The purpose of SRGO is in complete alignment with cutting the green tape, in that with the order, we set out to expedite consultation, authorization, and permitting of restoration projects intended to help the state of California achieve its habitat restoration, species recovery, and water quality improvement goals. The SRGO is a programmatic permit that allows applicants to enroll in a pre-existing order as opposed to applying for an individual permit. So this programmatic approach is an expedited permitting method because first, there's statewide consistency with one application for restoration projects applicable throughout the state. Second, a program environmental impact report was prepared to support the SRGO that can be used as deemed appropriate by a lead agency to satisfy CEQA for individual restoration projects. And then third, the order provides general protection measures and design guidelines that align as appropriate with other regulatory agency approvals for similar projects. We did a lot of outreach with both federal and state partners during development of the order to try and achieve as much alignment as we could. So all of these efficiencies mean a shorter overall permit processing time and the process that tends to be less expensive and more predictable. So there you go.
And so, in fact, I'd say also just flagging that this implements a specific recommendation that came up during that stakeholder process, one of the 14 recommendations. We can just like check that box. You guys did it. And so, you know, a lot of gratitude and appreciation to you, and also to your partners at Sustainable Conservation who helped really do a lot of the legwork and helped you carry that across the finish line as well. And can you tell me, as someone who has been a huge customer of the general order for the small habitat restoration projects, big fan, big customer, when can we expect that we'll be able to use this new general order and the programmatic EIR?
It's on the street now and available for use. Actually, we've been talking with applicants throughout the state, from San Diego all the way up through North Coast. And I anticipate having our first enrollees under the order within the next month or two.
Right. And so where do you recommend that people go to use this tool? Do you want to maybe, oh, there it is.
Yep. You got it. I would say all the SOGO documents, including the notice of intent, which is the application for this process, as well as any of the program EIR components, if you'd like to review those, are available at the State Water Board program homepage for wetlands and watersheds. So my colleague Sarmat El-Casey joined me today here, so he dropped the link in the chat for you. I also encourage any potential applicant or someone interested in using the order to reach out to the approving water board as soon as is appropriate. So you kind of know where your project is and what you want to do to start discussing your project and potential enrollment in that order, so we can help you develop it so it indeed does fit the order requirements.
Right. And since the regional boards are the ones that are really going to be having a lot of the discretion about how this rolls out within their regions, it's important for people to reach out to their regional board representatives and work with them directly, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That being said, there's been a lot of outreach as a state board since it was developed in my unit at state board. I've been sitting in on a lot of the initial pre-application meetings and discussions, simply as the fly on the wall to answer any questions and work through initial implementation as the region boards, get used to the order and we get things rolling, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. And then Brad, I know that the Department of Fish and Wildlife has been working really closely in the development of the new general order and the programmatic EIR, and that you've been trying to make sure that you have sort of consistent terms and approach regarding departments permitting and water boards permitting, but also to start to navigate when might someone want to use the new statutory exemption versus the new programmatic EIR. So here, for those of us who are practitioners around the state, is this exciting new era of multiple programmatic CEQA documents for us to be able to use for habitat restoration projects that are not limited by size. Exciting new times. How would somebody know which document to use, or which approach, which CEQA document to consider?
Yeah, it's so exciting to have all these choices, but it also might seem daunting. Which one do I use? Where do I go? And it actually was something we were asking as well internally. It's like, well, let's see, how is this going to work? And there's really no better way than to learn by doing. And so Jessica and I have been scheming and working together. And we've been present on several really triple agency consultations on real restoration projects that are asking that same question: which is the best pathway for my project? And so Jessica and I have really been working hard to collaborate learn from each other. And then we're sitting in on these meetings where we might normally be just doing a SERP consultation. We are bringing in the state board, and that's Jessica, as well as the regional board where the project's going to be conducted. And we're actually working through that in real time. And Jessica, I'm sure, can elaborate on this, but the new general order is sort of agnostic when it comes to what the CEQA pathway actually is. One could use the program EIR. One might also use a project-specific CEQA document that's been prepared. One might also use the statutory exemption and theoretically maybe a categorical exemption. And so by doing this collaboration and being in the room, with project proponents, we've been able to really glean quite a bit of information. And one of the things that seems to be coming out of that is that it really does make sense, I think, to first look at the program EIR as the CEQA tool for one's project. But then you have to ask the question, does the EIR really cover that project in full and its impacts? And if it does, fantastic. If it may not, there may be a need to do some additional CEQA work, and that could be some sort of supplement to the program EIR or the like. And that's where maybe then SERP might come in as being another possible pathway that could be a lot quicker, less cost, less work, to kind of bridge the gap there. And many of these projects, if not nearly all of them, likely are going to qualify both for the program EIR as well as SERP. So that's really the approach we're seeing. I think it's going to be a hybrid. We're going to see different CEQA pathways chosen along the way, depending on the needs of the project. And so it's been a great thing.
Yeah, that is exciting. And then just a reminder for folks who might not be really familiar with the jargon, that SERP is the statutory exemption for restoration projects. And that was the new change that was made to CEQA. So we can sometimes use the statutory exemption and SERP interchangeably. I just wanted to make sure that everybody with us today is on the same page, that those are the same things. And then, Brad, I get really inspired sometimes when I talk with you and hear about some of the other ancillary benefits or conversations that are coming up around this level of coordination. So maybe you can share with people who are here with us today, like anything else that you're seeing as an outcome of your agency's collaboration.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. And the first kind of obvious one is just the efficiency, because a person who has a great project that wants to move forward would have to go to one agency and then maybe go to the other agency and then back and forth. And then maybe those two agencies start emailing each other. Here we can kind of do this in a room, or at least a virtual room, in real time. And so we can kind of boom, 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 boom. Yes, this is going to work. No, that's not going to work. And if not, identify the best pathway, really narrow it down. So that's one thing. And these are complex topics. Having choices is a wonderful thing, but it also, could be really, really daunting if you haven't worked in this realm before. And most of us haven't. This is new stuff. So that's a really big thing. The other one that's so important is, we really want to learn about RGO and how it works and how the program EIR works. And there's no better way to learn than to be there and work through these things and sort of learn by doing. And so, we've had somewhere around 5 or so, I believe, consultations with the water boards and CDFW and the project team, and sometimes the lead agency as well. And that's been a great way just to learn about each other's process and programs. And then behind the scenes, we're also collaborating and presenting to each other and basically jointly training as SRGO rolls out. And so that's another huge benefit. And just even to get to know some of the regional staff who maybe I don't know, and realize that we're all part of the same team, not just the agencies, but the project proponent too. And we're all invested and motivated to find the best fit for that project.
Yeah,
so there's so many intangibles there.
Yes. And again, just a clarification of terms for folks. So SRGO is the same as RGO, is the same as the statewide general order, is the same as the general order. So even though there's 2 general orders that many of us will be using, but just to make sure we're all on the same page with that. And last but not least, I know that we have to wrap up this segment, but Brad, this is another one for you specifically, reflecting on these recent storms and what some of us have been dealing with in these storms. Is there any role for the SERP in or permit efficiencies in those repairs or recovery from the storms?
Yeah, I think there is, and so one really kind of heartbreaking example was a group in Southern California working on the Ventura River had cleared out an arundo infestation. You can't always have the world work perfectly and start at the top of the watershed. There's landowners and there's issues with that, but they did what they could do on a property they could control. And then we had the storms, and it was reseeded by Mother Nature with all kinds of new arundo culms, beautifully buried in moist soil. And so that is such a sad thing. And so when we have these emergencies, there are certain human life and safety type exemptions and things that we always want to think about first, but then there's the environmental piece. And so we're ready, we're standing by to help with those situations in any way that we can. If there's not an existing emergency type exemption that could fit to help remediate those sites, and SERP could be one of the tools in that realm, as could some of our other cutting green tape tools. And then I also want to just pitch, when you're developing your project, think about things like that. Think about emergencies or unexpected events. And if you can weave that into your project description, get that into your CEQA coverage, get that into your permits. When we have one of these events, you may not need to do much at all. You may be able to go in and remediate the issue. And so that's something that we've been trying to push. Don't just think about the really exciting project implementation part. Think about operation and maintenance, repair, emergencies, monitoring, all the way down the line. And so that's something that we're really trying to promote when thinking about a project.
Yeah, incorporating that into your project description, essentially, as opposed to different projects. So Brad, last but not least, very quick question before you go. Maybe you can just quickly speak for those who might not be familiar with the governor's CEQA exemption for infiltration projects that suspends CEQA and an LSA before you guys, lake and stream bed alteration agreements.
Yeah.
Before you guys leave this screen.
Right. Yeah. So there is a new order which suspends CEQA, and that's a little different than exempts CEQA. It actually, CEQA does not apply at all when it's suspended, and so that is going to grease the skids for getting water out of our over wet rivers and onto landscapes where they can help recharge the groundwater. And the same for lake and stream bed notification requirements in our Fish and Game Code. And it's really worth it to read the order and understand its terms. And I think that those two items that you mentioned, Calix, are really going to go a long way into enabling that activity to occur. Yeah. And should there be other needs, for example, needs around protected species and the California Endangered Species Act, as related to some of these infiltration projects, that's where people could feel free to reach out to Cutting the Green Tape, and we can see how we might help with that part of the issue.
Great, thank you. I hope people will take you up on that. If you would be so kind as to put your contact information, or whoever is the contact information, in the chat. I want to thank both of you for joining us today and for all the interagency efforts that you've been bringing forward. It's something that was really called for by the stakeholders throughout the Cutting Green Tape roundtables process. Very exciting to see it really happening. So thank you so much, and thank you for your time today. And I'd like to ask Shawn if he could join us back on screen, and I will be signing off.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Calix. Thank you, Brad and Jessica. What a great conversation. And I think a great transition there at the end towards where we want to go next, which is conversations like the one that we just had with Brad and Jessica came about because you guys, as a broader community, requested that kind of interaction and exchange with agency and regulatory partners and leaders in this space as we think collectively about how do we think differently about the work we're doing together and think about how to achieve those multiple benefits and achieve the efficiencies that we're looking for that help us ultimately increase the pace and scale of the work. So the last thing we want to do together today, and invite you to start thinking about this now, we're going to go into breakout rooms for about 10 minutes. going to ask you to connect with 5 or 6 of your colleagues and really think about 2 questions. First, what have you found most valuable about the exchanges that we've held to date, whether that was the conversation that we had today or any previous exchange that you've attended? What was it that stood out? Was it the information, the update, the lessons learned, the case studies, the agency perspective, the regulatory information, whatever it might be? What were those nuggets that you really found valuable? And part of that is thinking back, but also looking forward. So the second question is, as we continue to build the scope, the scale, the momentum around cutting green tape and related efforts, what kinds of tools, information, exchange, dialogue, workshopping would be most beneficial to you? What have you found most valuable from the exchanges that we've held to date? So I'd invite someone from, well, I'd invite you all to go ahead and jump over to the chat, and whether you had a designee or if you just want to jump in there yourself, share the response in the chat. So what is it that you've most appreciated or valued from the exchanges we've had? And as you're doing that, I'll just share that from the group I was in, a lot of appreciation for the agency perspective that's come forward. Really some great accolades for that progress tracker tool that we unveiled today, and thinking about how we're not just building shared momentum, but actually able to demonstrate success and how those things help us with the pace and scale of the work that we're doing. Also, one of the things that we talked about was just how some of the specific deep dives have really provided insights and information that's been helpful to transfer to different contexts and situations. So, all right, so seeing Devin's jumped in. I'm guessing other of you guys have insights here too that you can share with us. But Devin said consistent focus on bringing updates. Okay, here we go. Now you're jumping. The interagency collaboration piece, the momentum building, common theme of duplicity of applications to multiple agencies. Yeah, and just that ability to be more coordinated and efficient across agencies, the interagency coordination. Case studies are really valuable, right? Seeing these ideas and concepts and tools applied to place, the progress that's been made, the hidden hero stuff, right? Very cool to see people being acknowledged for all their thought leadership and work behind the scenes to make all of these connections and to facilitate progress. Just gonna pause and read here. And Jen, if there's anything that you're seeing and want to call out, feel free to jump in.
Well, I have an overarching comment, but let's see what else comes through. I mean, what I'm seeing is, cutting green tape and the whole, initiative could look like a bunch of hand waving, but it is not, right? It's actually through these forums, we're finding ways to really, I like somebody wrote demystify, unpack, make sure that the tools are actually available, that people know how to use them. We're not just getting together to cheerlead, but we're trying to find a way to really make sure the work moves forward and that the work that's been done gets put into practice. And so I'm liking that people recognize this space as a valuable space for that, because I think that's the most important thing, right? Is learning and making sure you're not missing out on some new way to advance restoration more effectively. So I love seeing that, because that's what I hoped we were accomplishing, and great to hear people think that, and that it's wanted.
Yeah, no, totally agree. I mean, that was one of the things that I was reflecting on too, is that this is content and it's information that's been requested by this community, and so just to be responsive to that has been great. So reflecting back on some early comments that Secretary Crowfoot made, he was talking about the accomplishments, how fun and energizing a lot of the work has been, how we're building momentum, but that there's still a lot to do as we look towards the future to adapt and to explore new frontiers, was the language he used. So curious to switch to this second question, and it's kind of the new frontiers question. What new frontiers might we explore as a community to continue to add value, maybe in different ways than we have in the past? If there's gaps in our ability to connect or learn, what might some alternative pathways be for us to continue to grow and evolve as a community? So again, just invite you to jump in to the chat and share any ideas that you have for how we can even do more moving forward to connect, to learn, to grow. And again, I'll start by sharing in my small group, we talked about how it was kind of building from the conversation today. There's so many efforts happening in different ways that whenever we can find those efficiencies across agencies or across different initiatives or efforts and leverage that intersection point, that's great. And whether it's the interagency resilience working group and cutting green tape or something else, to look for those threads so that we can leverage them. Part of it is just making sure that we continue to build the capacity to do this work well, and whether that's funding capacity or the skills and ability to work more effectively across boundaries and to do that hard work of coordination and collaboration. That's great. And then how do we just continue to share resources and build in spaces for learning and exchange? But what else do we have here? A quick question on recordings being available. Yes, that
Always,
will be
always.
always.
Yep.
Oh, here we go. Stephanie's jumping in. Highlights from their group about pathways. Learning more about what new pathways offer and how they differ from the alternative. Really appreciate about the CERT process is that they reached out directly to ask those questions, right? So direct engagement is great, and just continuing to make sure that we're learning from and connected with each other. More conversations around the complex multi-benefit projects. Yeah, hearing a lot of
Yeah.
that. How do we
I agree
we
with that. That's
capture
so
that?
needed. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that would, maybe that's our next one, is how do we unpack those multi-benefit projects so we can really move them forward? I think that's so needed.
In-person working sessions, wouldn't that be great, Erica?
Wait, what?
Yeah,
There were tacos at the one I got to go to like 3 years ago. Big fan of tacos.
yeah, no, we've done an amazing job connecting online, but we do miss each other, and especially
Yeah.
the connection to place, right? To get to see some of these projects in person might be fun.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, thank you guys for jumping in and sharing this. And we do just have a minute left, so want to offer Jen any just closing comments you'd have on today's exchange or just in general as we're continuing to grow together as a community and look towards the future.
Well, I think I feel like say this every time, but I mean it every time. It's just gratifying to me that there are so many people working hard to advance restoration, looking for ways to make it happen more effectively, and the willingness to share lessons learned, failures, successes, work together to really make this happen. It just makes me feel glad every time. It's not glamorous. Like, let's just admit that, right? It sounds like it when you tell your parents this is what I do, but the truth is a lot of it's just hard work, even before you get the shovel in the ground. And so I'm gratified to see this community, and I'm always thrilled to get to be part of this. So, and I love the chat crowdsourcing. Good ideas, Calix, I agree. So that's my last thought, is thank you all for being part of this. It just makes my day. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And just thanks so much for spending the time sharing your insights with us, with each other, for building this community that stays connected and learns and grows and evolves together. It feels like not only getting great work on the ground done, but we are moving towards that greater pace and scale that everyone's aiming for. So thanks so much for joining. If you do have a moment, please jump on and share your thoughts in that poll everywhere about how today went. Stay connected by jumping online, sending us a note. Any of the information that you provided or that you all shared or that we provided in the chat today will be shared out. Keep in touch, stay well, and hope you continue to be adaptive and resilient in all the stormy weather that's headed your way. So good to see you all. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.